Hey everyone, Temporal here, and we are going to go ahead and talk about the news that just broke in the stream for Overwatch. And that is, as you can see on the screen by the article I've pulled up, that we are looking at 5v5 for Overwatch 2. So for Overwatch 2, we're going to be looking at some 5v5, and that means one tank on each side in the PvP shenanigans. That's probably the biggest news, and I'll certainly react to that. The other pieces of news that are probably meaningful from a competitive standpoint is that we're seeing the passives. They've been elaborated on a little bit more. We've seen a little more gameplay of those. The tanks are going to get both CC reduction and feeding less ult charge. The DPS are going to get faster movement speed, and the supports are all going to get some degree of self-heal like Mercy has. We knew most of that before. I don't think we knew that the tanks were going to get the double passive there. Maybe we did, but we knew most of those before, but we've seen a little more example of what that looks like. We've seen that the health regen on the supports that aren't Mercy is going to be weaker than Mercy's health regen is in the current version of Overwatch, and it looks like based on the eye test that the DPS movement speed that DPS players will get in Overwatch 2 is faster than the movement speed that Tracer and Genji have over the rest of the cast in Overwatch 1. So that's going to be bigger than what those two have, whereas the support one is going to be weaker than what Mercy has. The support change, or the ult charge feed from tanks being less, looks like it's pretty meaningful, as well as the CC reduction. And then the other thing that we've gotten is that they're going to pull away some of the CC from non-tank heroes. They want less CC in the game, so they're going to take some of it away from non-tank heroes, and then only having one tank on the board. If your tank is bringing sort of the majority of your CC, should mean quite a bit less CC. An example of that would be Mei's weapon. In the current iteration, looks like it's not going to freeze. On the other hand, Anna gets to keep her sleep dart. So we'll see exactly what that means for Overwatch 2. But now let's get into what does that mean? What does it mean if we're playing Overwatch in a 5v5 scenario with just one tank on each side? And it really leads us to a couple questions that we want to think about here. One is, how are tanks going to be played? And I really see a couple ways this can go. One way this can go is tanks get to play in basically their existing form. It looks like this is off the table. It looks like they're going to be getting some buffs, Winston some range, Zarya some bubble change, etc. They're going to be getting some buffs to make them more powerful pieces. But if you don't make them very much buff-wise, it's going to be a situation where they go try to aggressively take space, because that's primarily what a main tank's job is in Overwatch, and they're sort of mostly being balanced to do that. They're not all being balanced to do that, and you're only going to be able to play one at a time. If you go aggressively take space, and you don't have an off-tank to protect that main tank, to enforce the space that the main tank takes, what is that going to mean? Well, that's probably going to mean the main tank gets blown up. Now, we have seen sort of the test of this theory we've seen it actually about 2 years ago. Back in the GOATS era, you would see the quad DPS snowball, where you'd run 4 DPS with 2 supports. And what would happen is these quad DPS team would absolutely wipe out a GOATS team. So they would wipe out the GOATS team, they'd come out on offense, wipe out a GOATS team, and then they would just go take all the space in the world. We saw this on Route 66 a lot, where they would go, they would, after winning one fight on first, push halfway into second, push 3/4 of the way into second to just take the space while it's free. And they could take the space initially against the GOATS team, because GOATS accepted that it needed to go, we completely surrender map control in exchange for objective control and extreme amounts of peel. So a quad DPS team could take space for free, even with no tanks to take space, and then they could win, and then they'd take space for free while they were in spot. Those quad DPS were actually able to enforce that space reasonably well. If they went and took 2/3 of second point, they'd be able to enforce that reasonably well, even against a 2-2-2 dive that would come out and could correctly take space back against them. So no tank would traditionally mean you could enforce space. DPS are capable of enforcing space, but you can't take it. So now if we're looking at one tank, it would seem likely that you'd want to go heavily for a tank that can take space, and DPS players would have to adjust to get really good at enforcing the space very quickly. Like the tank takes space, the DPS players immediately adjust their positions to enforce the space that tank player has taken. I'm going to be honest, I have serious doubts about players' abilities to do that at low levels. Like, it would require the entire cast in a game that it looks like they're trying to make more individual based on the passives. It would require the entire cast understanding exactly what they need to do to support the tanks in very small windows. So the other option is, okay, well, if you do that, and the players don't understand what they need to do to support their tanks, your tanks are going to burn out unless you make them super, super powerful. That's not great. And if you make tanks super, super powerful, where they can regularly, like 1v2, for example, or they can go, hey, I'll 1v1 you, but I can't lose this 1v1, even if you're way better than me as a player. If you go that route, that's not going to be amazing either. People aren't going to like that when they are the DPS player and the tanks can consistently 1v1 them. Now, it won't actually work out that way because what'll happen is the DPS with their better movement speed will almost always be able to get away, I expect. At least that's what I'd expect from a design perspective, but that's still really going to feel bad. If every time a DPS meets a tank, they just have to leave. That has to be their solution because the tank is tuned to beat them. So from this, I see a lot of ways that this can go wrong, and I'm definitely concerned about it. On the other hand, the good thing to this, and the reason that they're doing this in the first place, is this is a better job of the Overwatch, the Blizzard team, designing the game or trying to design the game around what humans actually want to do. Trying to design against what humans actually want to do against human nature doesn't work very well, and it is very clear that there are less people in video games that want to play tank than that want to play DPS. And while there might be more that want to play DPS than support, there are significantly more that want to play support than want to play tank. So this is probably a good balance from a human nature standpoint, and that might be good for the game. And there is a way that they can get this right. It's really tough, but there is a way that they can get this right where, hey, can we perhaps properly educate our DPS players? Can we pass this knowledge well enough? Can we get better tutorials into the game of, hey, your tank goes and takes this space? Can we get good enough educational content out there? Your DPS have to aggressively go take the space, go take the freshly opened up space, and then enforce that to protect their tank. It'll be a real question. It'll be a real question. It could be great, but I have a lot of concerns about where this is likely to go wrong. So could be, hey, we'll shoot the moon. More likely to bust. More likely to bust. But I'm hoping we shoot the moon with this one. So that's sort of from a competitive standpoint, what this likely means, what this likely looks like, what they'll have to do. They've shown us that they're willing to buff the tanks a bit, but it was not like they were walking around with tanks with 3,000 health there or anything. So it might just be tanks get blown up, and that will not fix the Q problems. If the tanks get blown up and burn out, the Q problems could be just as bad as they were. So that's really what I wanted to get into there. We did see some new map stuff. I will probably go ahead and later do a review of one or two of the matches that they played there. It wasn't particularly high-level Overwatch that they were playing, and I did see that people were like, oh, the maps are so open, and there's so much flanking, and there's so much space, and it's great. And there is a little more to that. The maps did perhaps look a little bit more open, but I have to say there's less players on the board, that opens things up a bit, but some of that looked to me like players didn't properly understand what are the power positions, what points of the map do you control to shut down the whole map. I'm not sure it's going to lead to this faster paced thing. Like, I know in the demo we saw, oh, it looks faster paced, etc. I'm not at all convinced that it's going to be faster paced. Again, if your tanks are just going in and getting blown up, your tanks are going to stop going in, and that's going to cause everyone to be playing let's take a bunch of angles and hold a bunch of corners, and whichever team advances just gets blown up, and that could lead to a heavily defensive favored thing. Now, if they've opened up the maps a bit, that could help make it a little less defensively favored, but if initiating just gets you blown up because you can't control space that you earned, it's going to be harder. And this might be a good change on their side that they're opening up the maps a little bit. But then what do we do about the old maps? Are we updating the old maps to open up a little bit? Is that what we're doing? Really going to be tough to see here. But yes, if you guys are interested in seeing a review of the maps that were played, please do subscribe to the channel so that you see when that pops up. I'll try to do that later today or tomorrow. I think that would be interesting to do. Obviously, it's not going to be a perfect review. I don't even get to know what all of the abilities of the heroes do because Overwatch 2 is different and I don't perfectly know the maps, etc. But if you want to see what analysis of Overwatch 2 from a professional coach looks like, do go ahead and subscribe so you can see that. Other than that, let's get into questions now because I think those were the biggest things that we've covered that we saw: the 5v5 one tank, the passive stuff, and sort of what we saw in the maps in terms of them being more open, as well as some of the UI stuff. So, question wise, what do we have? I get the feeling Mercy will want to save res for a tank rather than DPS. Maybe. It depends how powerful they make the tanks. It could also be that you're just not going to be able to res anyone except DPS because if your tank is gone, you're just not going to be able to have enough cover most of the time to get a res off. Remember, a 5v5 means less people to protect you. A 5v5 means a res is a bigger deal because it brings back 20% of your team, but it also means, hey, 20% of your team is missing when you're trying to get a res off. That's going to be tough. I would Valk just to res the tank. If we'll see. I think the Brig problem is they made tanking largely unappealing. I think that is true. I think that is true. And I say that as a former main tank player. I think that's true, but I would be curious on what your thoughts are, Blah, for how you would make tanking more appealing. There's definitely ways to do it, but I think some of the best ways to make tanking more appealing are to not let people queue for Overwatch games unless they are in a group of 6 because you're going to get the level of cooperation that tanks need if you do that. There's other things that they could do, sure. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are for how you would make tanks more appealing. Because again, I want them to be successful with Overwatch 2. I want this to be a good change. It's just going to be a really fine needle that I don't have the greatest confidence that they'll be able to hit. Shrug, DPS players ruined game, pre-roll queue on ladder, open queue is still a clown show, and solo tanking. There's still Zach's not really enthusiastic to play Overwatch at the moment. I hear you, Levy. I do. I'm hopeful that we're going to get something good, though, because there is a gem here if they can just polish it and find it. But I completely understand why there would be doubts of that happening. They're trying to make it more Call of Duty than Overwatch, which is a mistake. Call of Duty is far better at being Call of Duty than Overwatch is. I think that's true. I think there is something to be said for, hey, try to make Overwatch Overwatch. Don't try to design it to the game. Like, Overwatch was designed with a design goal in mind. It was designed to be, let's be honest, the advancements of Team Fortress 2. It was designed to be that sort of game. And just because games in a similar but not exact same space are now more popular does not mean you try to turn your game into those games. Your bones don't really fit those games. So I agree. It would be a keep this game good, except that your market cap may be smaller on this game now, and start working on your new game. It's been a while since we saw a new game released. There's no reason that Blizzard can't do what Blizzard does and go, okay, we've done our touch on RTS, we've done our touch on MMO, we've done our touch on team-based shooters now, we've done our touch on collectible card games with Hearthstone, we've done our loot grinders with Diablo. Okay, now let's go see, now we want to do an arena shooter? Okay, we can go do an arena shooter, but that's not what Overwatch is. If you want to go do an arena shooter or you want to go do a survival type game, that's fine. Go make that game, but that's a different game. Okay. You should review some of their gameplay. Yep, Jimbo, I announced in this video, actually, that I will be doing that. It's going to be, a little trickier than normal because I won't have a perfect camera for it, but that's fine. I review without perfect cameras all the time, but it'll be on maps that I'm not familiar with. I won't know where the flanking routes are, etc., where the health packs are, and I won't know how all the abilities work because they've done things like make may not freeze people, but we're going to review it. I think it's going to be fun. Respawn did that with Titanfall. I hear you. Okay, well, I think that covers the news. I think those were the big things, and I think those are the big takes that I wanted to give here. They made Apex based on Titanfall lore, and it turned out to be a hit. Okay, I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done. You can do it, but you sort of get into the, I mean, you definitely can do it, but you sort of get into the, okay, when is Overwatch Classic coming out in that case? Because you're going to have some percentage of your fans who desperately want to play the game that was actually there, the game that was, the one that they enjoyed, etc., not the game that it's been turned into. But that's fair. I mean, I understand it. I would just prefer to, hey, go build your new game to go do that. But I understand working with an existing IP gets you more momentum, and I understand why it's appealing. It's not the same game, though, which is my point. Exactly. Exactly. Okay, that's going to do it. If you guys are enjoying the content, please do like and subscribe, as that helps me out quite a bit, and I really do appreciate it. Or if you are looking to get coaching on Overwatch, or perhaps Overwatch 2 in the future, you can join my Discord in the description below, see what rates look like, promos, special events, all that good stuff. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.